Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank all the witnesses for their testimony and knowledge. I've learned a lot, but I'm still not sure where I am on this issue. And I'm curious that we talked about the potential downside. And while everything looks wonderful right now with an abundance of oil and petroleum in the world and prices down, that would seem to be mitigate against worrying about a crisis, but isn't it entirely possible that we could return to a 1970s situation? I was a staffer here in the 70s and remember those lines as well. So would it not be useful to have at least some contingency measure if we, because whether it's an international outbreak, a war, terrorism, whatever it may be, that we have some way to protect our domestic supply in case of an emergency, as opposed to just saying we'll worry about that when we get to it? Ms. Gordon, you want to?
So I think because we're in this era of new oil and everything's changing, the risks are changing. We have the geopolitical risks on the one hand with many of the places abroad that have historically produced oil, and then we have operational and environmental risks here that we have to contend with. So we have new oils, new conditions, and then we have huge growth in China in terms of demand that's sporadic. It's not going to be, you know, red hot consistently. It's a market. And so we do tend to talk about oil at a moment in time, maybe because it's sold on every corner, that it's as if this is the condition that exists for all time, but the reality is it's very dynamic, and we could easily return with risks, differential risks, different consumption patterns. Even in America, we're selling a lot more SUVs right now. They're up tremendously. I mean, we're reversing our demand profile, as Adam said, but we're not necessarily bound to that.
So there's no guarantee, given the volatility of the market, that if we eliminate the prohibition, that we can have the kind of impact on prices that we would expect, that the prices will necessarily be lower. We can't guarantee that.
Yes, and in addition to what was said earlier, where we will, because we have the largest refining capacity, we will maintain imports of oil even, you know, just because we want to put product on the market. That's what industry does here. It's one of the big parts of industry.
I think if I could just answer to your question, you know, most of the oil we consume in the United States is in the transportation sector. And it seems to me that rather than maintain the ban on crude oil exports, we would be much wiser to have an accelerated program to use our vast natural gas reserves to a greater degree in transportation. There have been numerous studies. You know, it would be a long-term effort, but if we could replace the diesel fuel that we use in our 18-wheel trucks, some people say that would be another 1.8 million barrels a day of oil we didn't use. If we can use natural gas in marine transportation on the Great Lakes, on our major rivers, coastal trade, that's another major place we could save. And we have companies already experimenting with using LNG and railroad locomotives. So if we could reduce the use of oil in transport by relying on our vast natural gas, I think that would be a far more prudent policy than continuing the ban on crude oil export.
If I could just add one thing. You know, if we go back and look at the history of EPCA and everything we did, if you want to take one lesson out of that, we need policies which are robust against uncertainty. And every time we try to guess or we think we know what the future looks like, nuclear power is going to be too cheap to meter, or we're going to ban the use of natural gas in power plants. We really have a hard time getting this right. And we don't really know what the future looks like. But what we do know is that we do much better when we have policies that allow allow the marketplace and individuals to adjust to changing circumstances. Because once we put something in place here in Capitol Hill, it's really hard to fix it, you know. I know those of us who go way back remember, you know, we had dozens of small refiners. People remember this? We had dozens of these small refineries which came out of the arcane regulations of price controls. And when it came time to decontrol crude oil prices, it was really hard because we had this political establishment of small refiners all over the country. So I think we have to keep in mind as we go forward that what the real lessons of this renaissance is. It was an open system, right? This all occurred on private land. The government the heavy hand of the government was really not trying to stop these guys. We didn't have to rely on federal land. And so as we go forward, we ought to really think hard about what kinds of strategies are likely to be more productive.